Before she turned 18, she was already broken. Judy Garland, the radiant girl who sang Over the Rainbow, became one of Hollywood's most tragic legends, not because she failed, but because she succeeded too early, too completely, and under too much control. The world saw her as Dorothy, innocent and full of wonder. But the truth? She was drugged, starved, humiliated, and caged in a studio system that built its empire on her suffering. Those iconic red shoes? They didn't take her home. They dragged her deeper into a nightmare she could never escape. She was forced into a role she never chose, made to stay small, skinny, sweet, and silent. Pills to wake up, pills to sleep, pills to keep working. MGM executives monitored her meals, shamed her appearance, and engineered her image with surgical cruelty. On screen, she gave the world magic. Off screen, she barely had a childhood. Judy wasn't just a star. She was a sacrifice. Her downfall wasn't sudden, it was manufactured. Piece by piece, the girl behind the voice was taken apart by the machine that made her. Her death at 47 wasn't a tragedy of circumstance. It was a long, slow execution carried out in plain sight, under the spotlight. This is the story of Judy Garland. Not the myth, but the girl who paid the price for our fairy tale. The girl whose real-life journey through Oz was darker, lonelier, and more haunting than any yellow brick road could ever show. Hollywood in the 1930s was a factory of illusions, and MGM was its most powerful assembly line. It didn't just make movies, it made stars, sculpting them like clay into perfection, regardless of the cost. And at the center of this machine was a teenage girl with a hauntingly mature voice and a vulnerable smile. Judy Garland. Born Frances Gumm, Judy arrived in Hollywood as a child performer already seasoned by the grind of vaudeville. But nothing could prepare her for what awaited behind the gilded gates of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. At 13, she was signed not for her beauty, but for her voice, a decision that both saved her and doomed her. In an industry obsessed with flawless blondes and porcelain skin, Judy was considered the odd one, the studio's awkward little secret. They called her chubby. They hid her in supporting roles. And then they found a way to use her. The Wizard of Oz was supposed to be a fantasy, a heartwarming musical about courage and home. But for Judy Garland, it was the beginning of a lifelong performance she'd never be allowed to leave. At 16, she was cast as Dorothy Gale, and MGM set about transforming her into an idealized vision of innocence. They bound her chest to flatten her figure, capped her teeth, reshaped her nose with prosthetics, and placed her on a starvation diet. And when that wasn't enough, they gave her amphetamines to stay awake and barbiturates to sleep. She was, quite literally, drugged into becoming a star. Filming Oz was brutal. 18-hour days, endless takes, and a set riddled with dysfunction and danger. The Munchkin actors allegedly harassed her. The Tin Man's makeup sent an actor to the hospital. The Wicked Witch suffered burns. But through it all, Judy delivered. Her voice trembled with a purity that made audiences weep. She became America's sweetheart, even as she was quietly falling apart. When The Wizard of Oz hit theaters in 1939, it immortalized Judy Garland as Dorothy, but also sealed her fate. She was no longer a teenager. She was a brand. She belonged to MGM. Her meals, her sleep, her relationships, her appearance, every detail was dictated by studio executives. Off camera, she was lonely, exhausted, and spiraling. On camera, she smiled. As the 1940s began, Judy's star soared. Meet Me in St. Louis, Ziegfeld Girl, Easter Parade. She lit up every screen she touched. But no matter how much she achieved, the industry refused to see her as anything more than that 16-year-old in the blue gingham dress. They had trapped her in time, a woman forced to live in the shadow of a girl. This wasn't just fame, it was captivity. The world adored Dorothy. But no one ever stopped to ask, what happened to Judy? Judy Garland's rise was dazzling, but beneath every standing ovation was a warning no one listened to. Born in 1922 into a vaudeville family, she began performing at just 2.5 years old. By the time she was a teenager, her voice carried a depth that defied her age, trembling with emotion that even seasoned performers couldn't fake. MGM signed her at 13. They didn't just want her, they wanted to own her. Her breakout came not gradually, but all at once. When she sang You Made Me Love You to a photograph of Clark Gable in a short film tribute, the audience reaction was so overwhelming that MGM knew they had their star. And then came The Wizard of Oz. The studio poured its resources into transforming Judy into the perfect Dorothy. But perfect came with a cost. She was given caps for her teeth, rubber discs to reshape her nose, and placed on a strict diet of black coffee, chicken soup, and pills. One executive reportedly called her the fat little pig with pigtails. To ensure she stayed slim and alert, she was put on amphetamines during the day and barbiturates at night, a cycle that would follow her for the rest of her life. Despite the brutality, The Wizard of Oz was a cinematic triumph. Judy's performance lit up the screen, vulnerable, heartfelt, unforgettable. The film earned her a special Juvenile Academy Award, and suddenly, she wasn't just famous, she was immortal. The applause never stopped, but the pressure only grew. In the 1940s, MGM cast her in hit after hit: Meet Me in St. Louis, The Harvey Girls, Easter Parade. Each success cemented her status as the studio's crown jewel and deepened her isolation. She worked exhausting schedules, often filming multiple projects at once, all while battling growing dependency on pills and rising anxiety. The cracks began to show. She would arrive late to set, break down between takes, sometimes disappear altogether. The studio labeled her difficult, but never questioned the system that had turned a teenage girl into a chemically dependent product. She was collapsing under their expectations, but they kept demanding more. In 1947, Judy suffered a nervous breakdown. She was institutionalized briefly, then sent back to work. Her marriage to director Vincente Minnelli, which had begun as a hopeful partnership, began to deteriorate. She gave birth to her first child, Liza Minnelli, and tried to anchor herself in motherhood, but the studio didn't slow down. By 1949, her emotional state was so fragile that she was fired from Annie Get Your Gun, a public humiliation that signaled the beginning of a free fall. She attempted suicide that same year. The woman who once brought joy to millions was now viewed by the industry as unstable, replaceable, and inconvenient. Still, she tried to fight back. She left MGM in 1950, ending a 15-year contract that had both made and destroyed her. For the first time, Judy Garland was on her own. No longer Dorothy, no longer the girl under the studio's thumb. But freedom, it turned out, came far too late. When Judy Garland walked away from MGM, she wasn't walking toward freedom. She was staggering into a world that had already forgotten how to care for her. The machine had used her up, and now discarded her. No longer protected by studio polish or publicity teams, Judy's real life began to bleed into public view. And it wasn't glamorous. It was raw, chaotic, and deeply human. She turned to the stage to survive. In 1951, she launched a concert tour that began at London's Palladium and later took her to Carnegie Hall, earning rapturous reviews and a temporary rebirth. Critics called it the greatest night in show business history. But even as her voice soared, her demons remained close. The years of drug dependency, emotional manipulation, and instability had taken permanent root. Judy married again, Sid Luft, her third husband, who took over as manager and tried to reboot her career with A Star is Born in 1954. It was a stunning performance, perhaps the best of her career. She poured every ounce of pain and brilliance into the role of Esther Blodgett, a woman crushed by fame and love, eerily mirroring her own life. When she lost the Academy Award to Grace Kelly, it felt like a robbery to the public and a personal defeat to Judy. Behind the curtain, things were falling apart. She attempted suicide multiple times. Her finances were in ruins and her relationships frayed. Her daughters would later speak of growing up amidst chaos, eviction notices, late-night panic attacks, and a mother who veered between tenderness and total collapse. And then came the tabloids. The press devoured her suffering. They published photos of her slumped in dressing rooms, printed headlines calling her a has-been, a disaster, a fallen star. Public sympathy gave way to mockery. No one asked what had caused the downfall. They just enjoyed the spectacle. And Judy, ever the performer, kept giving them something to look at, even when it was her own slow implosion. In 1967, she married a fifth time to Mickey Deans, a man nearly 2 decades younger, whose motives remain debated. Some saw him as a stabilizing force, others as a hanger-on. By then, Judy was spiraling financially, emotionally, physically. She was playing nightclubs for small checks, unable to pay rent, and relying on prescription drugs just to get through the day. The final days were not filled with drama, but with silence. In June 1969, Judy Garland was found dead in a London bathroom. The cause? Barbiturate overdose. It was ruled accidental. She was 47 years old. Her body weighed just over 40 kilograms. A letter from her doctor years earlier had warned, open quote, "She lives on the emotional edge of chaos." Close quote. The world mourned. Too late. Vigils were held, tributes aired, and thousands gathered for her funeral. But Judy had known what was coming. In one of her final interviews, she said, open quote, "If I'm such a legend, then why am I so lonely?" Close quote. Judy Garland's death wasn't just the end of a life. It was the final act of a tragedy that had unfolded in front of millions. A girl raised on applause, driven by perfection, destroyed by the system that claimed to love her. She never escaped Oz. Not really. She just followed the yellow brick road until it vanished beneath her feet. Judy Garland was not merely a fallen star. She was a warning etched into the history of fame itself. Her life story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How much of her suffering was inevitable, and how much was manufactured? Was she doomed by personal weakness, or destroyed by a system that rewarded talent only when it was obedient? At Legends and Secrets, we believe Judy Garland's story is not one of personal failure, but institutional betrayal. She was a product of an era that saw child stars as property, not people. The studios fed her pills, sculpted her image, and profited from every moment of her breakdown. They applauded her resilience while quietly engineering her collapse. What makes Judy's legacy so devastating is how preventable it feels in hindsight. Every cry for help was answered with a work contract. Every breakdown was followed by another performance. And even after she broke free from MGM, the trauma they instilled continued to define her choices, her relationships, and her self-worth. But we also recognize the undeniable brilliance that endured through it all. Her voice, rich, trembling, alive, could silence rooms and move crowds to tears. She could light up a screen even when her personal world was falling apart. Audiences didn't just love her, they believed her, because she gave them truth even when her own life was wrapped in illusion. Her performances weren't just entertaining, they were acts of survival. When she sang, she wasn't pretending. She was pleading, remembering, and sometimes just barely holding on. It's why A Star is Born remains one of the most hauntingly real performances in film history. She wasn't acting, she was reliving. We must also consider how public perception played a role in her downfall. At what point did society stop caring? When did the applause turn into indifference, or worse, ridicule? Judy Garland lived in an era before mental health advocacy, before addiction was understood as illness, before privacy was possible. And yet, the headlines continue to echo. Judy in crisis. Garland collapses again, washed up starlet. She was mocked for being unstable, when in truth she was a woman brutalized by decades of control, exhausted by years of performance, and longing, always, for a peace she never truly found. As a channel, we don't see Judy Garland as just a victim or just a legend. She was both. And that's what makes her unforgettable. She sang of rainbows while trapped in a storm. She made the world believe in magic while privately drowning in reality. And even in death, her story resonates. Not because it ended in tragedy, but because it meant something. What do you think? Was Judy Garland a casualty of her time, or a symbol of something more timeless and terrifying, the cost of being beloved? Let us know in the comments below. Tell us, what did Judy mean to you? What part of her story still lingers in your heart? And if you grew up watching The Wizard of Oz, does it feel different now? Because behind the Technicolor dream was a girl screaming to wake up. Judy Garland didn't fade, she was slowly erased. Bit by bit, piece by piece, the world took what it wanted from her. The songs, the innocence, the pain disguised as charm. The red shoes, the smile, the voice, they all became property of the public. But the girl? The girl disappeared long before the credits ever rolled. Her story doesn't end with a dramatic fall. It ends with exhaustion, with a woman who had nothing left to give, still standing under the spotlight, begging the world to see past the glitter. She gave everything, her body, her youth, her voice, to a system that only ever wanted more. Yet even in her most fragile moments, Judy remained unforgettable. Not because she was flawless, but because she was real. She cracked, she broke, she bled through every note, and the world felt it. Behind every performance was a heartbeat that wouldn't quit, even when she wanted to. The tragedy of Judy Garland is not that she died young, but that no one truly listened while she lived. Her legacy is more than a film, more than a song. It's a mirror held up to fame, to silence, to survival. She wasn't just the girl in Oz. She was every dreamer who got lost on the way home. Some stories were never meant to end happily. Some just echo, softly, painfully, beautifully, forever. And now, you know the truth behind the dream.